seems to be the overriding values that I have in terms of I'm on the air. She hasn't hit the gavel yet.
No, I'm waiting for Jesse.
She was just getting one other thing.
That's okay. Sorry. There we go. All right. Call to order this session of the Tacoma Park City Council. Will the city clerk, when she has a moment, please call the roll?
Mayor Stewart.
Here.
Councilmember Kovar.
Here.
Councilmember Mayo. Councilmember Qureshi.
Here.
Councilmember Siemens.
Present.
Councilmember Smith. Councilmember Schultz.
Here.
Thank you very much. So this evening, we do not have any additional agenda items. We have 2 more meetings of the City Council before we go on our winter recess. On Monday, December 7th, we will be having the second reading ordinance for the equipment at the Colby Park Playground, as well as the second reading ordinance authorizing renovation of the Colby Park Playground. Next week, we will also have a resolution adopting council rules of procedure, and we will be discussing those rules in our work session later tonight. 2 tentatively scheduled items for next week. One is a resolution authorizing a stormwater fee memorandum of understanding with Montgomery County, and another tentative item is a resolution providing for the appointments to committees. We have 3 work sessions scheduled for next week. One is a discussion of the Police Community Relations Consultant contract. Another is the noise ordinance, which we hope to have the text of so that we can circulate it for folks. I know Councilmember Schultz has asked for that as soon as possible. And the third work session is a discussion of a request to provide funding to supplement the 21st Century Community Learning Centers grant. And council members should have received those materials, and they're up on the website already. On Monday, December 14th, we will have a single reading ordinance awarding a contract for a police community relations consultant, if we're ready for that, and a resolution providing for the City Council's winter recess. Our work session on December 14th will be an overview of the Montgomery County Public Schools capacity report that was released about a month ago. Then we will go into recess until January 13th. City Council meetings will resume in January on Wednesday nights. And we have tentatively scheduled our 2 priority and budget meetings on January 19th and January 26th. They will be open to the public. And I think for agenda items, that is all we have. Next, we'll take public comments on voting items. We have 3 voting items this evening. The first is a resolution welcoming Syrian refugees. So if you have any comments on that, please come to the podium. You have 3 minutes. State your name and where you live.
Hello, my name is Thomas Nephew, Birch Avenue, Ward 1. Last week I spoke for a pro-refugee resolution similar to the one adopted by the Chicago City Council less than 2 weeks ago. I fact-checked its assertions and found one after the other to be true. 7 million displaced Syrians, 4 million of them refugees, but only 10,000 envisioned for settlement in the United States, and facing a Byzantine process of being vetted. We're here because Governor Hogan recently stated that even one refugee was one too many for him, unless that vetting process were further complicated and lengthened. Since last week's meeting, there's been an important development in Maryland around this issue. 39 civil rights and labor and religious organizations, including one I'm part of, Montgomery County Civil Rights Coalition, issued a joint letter to Governor Hogan, noting that calls for restricting the resettlement of Syrian refugees in Maryland only serve to stoke fear and hate and to jeopardize our moral leadership. They've suffered violence just like this for almost like what happened in Paris for almost 5 years. Many, if not most, have lost loved ones to persecution, violence, and starvation. Statement's a powerful one with a combined weight of the ACLU, Bill of Rights Defense Committee, Council on American Islamic Relations, the SEIU, many religious organizations. It also serves as a Rolodex of expertise for the City Council and volunteers and people of goodwill in our community. I reached out to the ACLU and through them to the International Rescue Committee in Maryland. Its director of that organization responded over Thanksgiving weekend with a detailed report IRC produced together with the City of Baltimore called The Role of Immigrants in Growing Baltimore. The document makes clear that it's possible to develop, in Mayor Rawlings Blake's words, a sustainable plan to support and retain immigrants. It outlines housing, workforce and small business development, safety, and youth policy responses. While not all of it's applicable to a small town like ours, the report serves as a resource and model for thinking through what our town needs to do to attract and better serve its present and future immigrant residents. I've shared it with my councilman. I look forward to working with whomever will join me and leaders like Lois Wessel or Leona Smith or other community members to build something like Baltimore's New Americans Task Force, and more importantly, work with City Council for real action for refugees and all immigrants. Maybe Governor Hogan, however, inadvertently did something for all of us to be thankful for. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
My name is Nancy Abbott Young. My father was Sam Abbott, the mayor of Tacoma Park, who, among other things, fought to establish Tacoma Park as a sanctuary city, providing refuge and asylum for refugees fleeing Central America and South Africa at the height of civil violence, war, political instability, and military repression. The sense of that remarkable ordinance, now over 30 years old, remains as meaningful today as it did then. It's a democratic work in progress, one that, much like the Nuclear Free Zone Ordinance, connects the local to the global. I'm particularly moved by one of the whereas clauses that was added in 2007. Whereas Tacoma Park believes that there is no inherent conflict between national security and the preservation of liberty, and that government can protect public safety without impairing civil rights and liberties. In the spirit of the Sanctuary City resolutions, I encourage the Mayor and Council to pass tonight's resolution welcoming Syrian refugees. Though many governors and members of the U.S. House of Representatives have, for mostly partisan reasons, voted to oppose Syrian resettlement, the federal government has set impeccable vetting standards. Local government has a major and unchallengeable role to play in this epic drama. Tacoma Park has an opportunity to stand with the U.S. Conference of Mayors, led by Baltimore Mayor Stephanie Rawlings Blake, to join 62 other mayors from 28 states, the District of Columbia, and Puerto Rico in support of Syrian resettlement under the U.S. Refugee Program. Governor Hogan has stated, "As Governor of Maryland, the safety and security of Marylanders remains my first priority. Following the terrorist attacks in Paris, I am now requesting that federal authorities cease any additional settlements of refugees from Syria in Maryland until the U.S. government can provide appropriate assurances that refugees from Syria pose no threat to public safety." As an American of Syrian descent, I found the governor's conflation of terrorist and Syrian refugee to be utterly repulsive and horrifying. I would like to remind the governor of Maryland two important facts about his own state. First, as a Catholic, he should recall that Maryland created the Religious Toleration Act in 1649 to create a haven for persecuted Catholics, which later helped set the stage for religious freedom for the entire United States. Second, not so long ago, this country experienced its own civil war, and over 23,000 died in 2 days at the Battle of Antietam. If we throw aside our Constitution and the ideals which it incorporates, peace and prosperity can too quickly turn to violence and desperation. Finally, with Governor Hogan's conflation of terrorists with refugees, and in this case with Syrian refugees in particular, there's the odious emergence of the other. I don't think I need to go into what that can mean in a society when you target a population. If Governor Hogan really wants to fight terrorism, he needs to call for a ceasefire, complete arms embargo, and he needs to follow the blood money to its source. Syrian refugees are trying to escape terrorism. They've seen their families destroyed, their homes and communities wiped to smithereens. Their children are being damaged for generations to come. Syria's treasures belong to all of us as world treasures. It's the birthplace of three great religions. It's common knowledge that the problems in Syria were kindled by the neighboring war in Iraq. Before then, Syria, despite its many and serious internal problems, was the most secular and religiously and ethnically diverse nation in the Middle East. All this is happening in the cradle of civilization, our cradle of civilization. In closing, as Sam's daughter, as a proud American of Syrian descent, as a Marylander, as someone born and bred in Tacoma Park, I salute this resolution and the spirit of humanity, inclusion, and fighting justice which informs it. Thank you very much.
My name's Linda Rabin. I live at 402 Lincoln Avenue in Ward 2. And the previous speaker's statement was so very eloquent that I don't have much to add. I would merely say, as a longtime human rights activist, I urge the council to pass the resolution and also to make it possible for the citizens of Tacoma Park to live out the promise of our role as a sanctuary city. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Liana Smith. I spoke last week as well. Over the course of the past week, I've spoken to several people who were concerned about the fact that our city might be looking at focusing resources on refugees and not focusing resources on those who are already in our city. And so I've mentioned this to a couple of people, but I sort of quickly went through to look at what it is that our city already does. And I literally took only about 15 minutes and was able to pull up a very large number of things, and it made me incredibly proud to be part of this community. I was looking at the fact that we have rent control. I was looking at the fact that we have all of the developments, all of the what's going on in New Hampshire Avenue. Catholic Charities is involved. We have the community block grants, Tacoma Foundation. My school has benefited from grants from the Tacoma Foundation. So I just want to sort of put that out there because that may come up as a criticism. And I just really felt like this paves the way for us to be able to help refugees and others come into our community. And again, just a huge shout out to everybody who's been involved in this. Thank you.
My name is Rohini Pandey, and I live on Willow Avenue. I actually hadn't prepared anything, but listening to all this, I just want to say that I'm an immigrant, though not, thankfully, a refugee, and chose to live in Tacoma Park because it's been wonderful in the way that the city embraces differences and embraces anyone who comes here. And anyone who is a resident of Tacoma Park can vote for Tacoma Park, for instance. This was the first time I ever voted anywhere. I think that this resolution is fantastic. And, you know, it may seem like a very small thing because we're a small city and it's a huge problem. But I really believe that the solutions start small. And Tacoma Park has always led the way on difficult issues in the county, in the state. And what I think we could do with this resolution is use it as an example for other towns in Montgomery County, in the state. We have people from Tacoma Park who are representatives at the county level, at the state level. And I think it's a great opportunity to make this a bigger issue and try and persuade Governor Hogan to back down from his statement, which is, it's insanity. At the very least, all the governors who supported this know that there is no way to enforce it. And, you know, everyone knows the facts, but I think this is a great action to use to then make this issue a county-wide and statewide issue. So I hope that the resolution will be passed. Thank you.
I'm Sue Wheaton. I live on Spruce Avenue, and I don't have a prepared statement either. Just to weigh in and say I think these first two statements and everybody else's have been marvelous and agree completely. I was handed this sheet of paper to write, I support refugees in Maryland because, and I wrote, it's the right, just, and humane position for a decent community to take. And Takoma Park is an exceedingly decent community, and what the governor has proposed is insane and not decent. And I think this is an excellent way for us to weigh in on the side of humanity. And so I very much support this.
Great. Okay, moving on to our next voting items this evening. I think since both of these are regarding the Colby Park Playground, first is a first reading ordinance authorizing the purchase of equipment, and the next is authorizing a contract for renovation. So if anyone would like to speak on the Colby Park Playground, please do so now.
Greetings, Paul Huben. I live on Carroll Avenue. Where can one find backup data on this proposal? For instance, the qualifications of the contractor, if are there performance bids or anything like that? Is all that stuff available online?
It's all available on the website with the council agenda, and we'll be talking about it in a bit.
Okay, and I would also be curious if you've done work with this Sandoval outfit before and what there is. My particular interest was a reference one time previously where there was a discrepancy between Daryl's idea of what lifetime warranty meant with speed bumps and what the contractor meant. And I would seek clarity on issues like that since it's real money. Thank
you. Carol Federici from the corner of Cherry and Colby. I just wanted to say the park at Colby, the Colby Avenue Park is very run down and old. It desperately needs modernization of the equipment, renovation of the physical grounds and so forth, so that the neighborhood kids can use it as a place to play and neighbors can use it as a place to gather. So I hope that we will move forward on the contract. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, anyone else?
My name's Caroline Zwicker, and I live on Colby Avenue. And just to second what Carol said, that it's a phenomenal community resource, and I hope the council will move forward to let us renovate it. And some neighbors have been feeling very nostalgic about the purple dinosaur, and it might be too late to change plans, but they'd like to keep it. But if we can't, that's okay too.
Thank you. Anyone else? All right. Before we open it up for public comments, this evening we are joined by Dr. Spence at the Washington Adventist University. And please, Dr. Spence, thank you for coming tonight. If you'd like to.
Thank you, Mayor Stewart. And on behalf of the Board of Trustees, the faculty and staff of Washington Adventist University, my name again is Weymouth Spence, and I represent that fine institution, the only four-year institution in Montgomery County, and I would like to offer congratulations to the mayor and to the council for their recent election. I have some, I'd like to talk a little bit about the value of having a higher education institution in the city of Takoma Park. It not only touches the future, but we have several programs there that I think would be beneficial to the city and to the council. This evening I'm emphasizing our annual Christmas concert, where our world-renowned music department, who have toured the world and performed in some of the major music halls throughout the world, will be performing on December 4 at 7:30. And I'd like to invite the council and the citizens of Takoma Park to enjoy this free, emphasis on free, concert, where our students and faculty and staff will be performing. And in the past, it has not been well attended, and we have put a major drive this year to demonstrate the value of a higher education institution in Takoma Park. Again, it's the It's going to be held at the Sligo Seventh-day Adventist Church, 7700 Carroll Avenue in Tacoma Park. The annual Christmas concert is free and open to the public. It will be presented by the Department of Music and will feature the performances of Per Musica, Columbia Collegiate Chorale, and the New England Youth Ensemble. If you would like to RSVP, you may do so at 301-891-4125 or email us at alumni@wau.edu. Again, we want to also express our appreciation for the work you do here in Tacoma Park in making sure that our city is not only safe but educational. That's all I have today. And again, congratulations, and we look forward to building a positive and collaborative relationship with the city of Tacoma Park. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you for coming this evening. Great. Now we'll open it up for public comments. If anyone would like to speak on anything else that's on the agenda this evening or any other issues, please come to the podium.
Mary Jane Mitsui, Ward 2, 404 Boyd Avenue. Now I would say I've got something written down because sometimes I don't say things the proper way. And I'm trying to be more diplomatic, okay? And I apologize. I did make comments about actually a refugee who just mistreated my son, but it could have easily been someone born in America that mistreated him. Because people like him who have got developmental and psychiatric disabilities are the low people on the totem pole. They are totally low. And I hate for begging, but I've begged all my life for him, and I'll continue, and I'll fight for him. I'm sorry if and I apologize if I'm not, don't say the right things, but I get very emotional because he's all I've got. He's my only child, and he's all I've got. I'll read this summary. Many of you probably think they were getting a lot of assistance from the state and county. This is far from the truth. My son is getting nothing. And he's been on the state's Developmental Disability Administration's list for over 9 years on the waiting list. They have told us if he is homeless, they may help him. But I'm supposed to kick my son out when he's autistic and he can just barely survive on his own? That's a hell of a decision to make, you know? Second of all, the wait list for the county's Housing Opportunity Commissions is at least 3 years, Because I've tried. My ex-husband, who's an immigrant from Kenya and was shot in the head and has very neurological problems, has been on their waiting list for over 3 years. That man, of all people, he's on the waiting list for 3 years, over 3 years. I checked with them. They won't give me exact date, but he hedged around. Probably 3 years, he said, but I can't really say. I really wish one of you all would check with Housing Opportunities Commission to check on that, because they don't listen to me, okay? Call them, please, if you don't believe me, okay? And they wouldn't give me how many people were on the waiting list, but please call them and find out, because they won't listen to me, like I said, okay? Anyways, and the programs that do help people find housing other than that are inadequate. Many times they depend on experienced low-paid workers, and many are situated in northern parts of the county and only have jobs available there in Gaithersburg at all. My son currently works in Bethesda. It takes him an hour and a half. Sorry for going over, but other people were allowed to go over. 1.5 hours each way to get to his job. The job sometimes has to be there when there's no public transportation, like 6 in the morning or till 11:30 at night. Also, it's really bad because he has Asperger's, and he's always told he can't take time off even to see his therapist. He can't take time off usually because he's a low person. They're told he's scared to ask for any time off because of his disability. And he's always changed. His schedule always changes weekly. Anyways, we need housing, please, supportive housing here in Tacoma Park, please. Supportive jobs here in Tacoma Park. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments this evening? Okay. We'll move on to council comments. Any council comments this evening? Nope. All right. And the deputy city manager has said already that there is no. Oh,
That's me.
sorry, Councilmember Schultz.
Sorry to
A late
spoil-
entry.
spoil the shutout here, or no hitter. I just wanted to comment on the commenters with regard to the Syrian resettlement issue. And I am very glad to hear the commentary from so many folks who pretty much feel exactly the same way I do. For those who are concerned about the city spending money on refugees when we have poor people who are already in the city who need help, there's nothing in this resolution, nor is there any intention that the city government would be spending any money at all on this project. This is a statement of our belief, our values, and it puts the full, if passed, will put the full weight of the city of Tacoma Park behind this statement of values, such that it'll hopefully set an example for other municipalities, but also give encouragement to all of those who feel the way so many people do, to organize around this issue, and that's the main purpose of this thing. And I just wanted to point that out. And that's really the only comment I want to say. Thank you.
Councilmember Qureshi.
Thank you, Mayor Stewart. When Councilmember Schultz speaks, I feel like he shouldn't be the only one. So, I only say I had an opportunity to speak about this issue, particularly the Syrian refugee issue last week. So I'm not going to beat a dead horse. But I will just say, for those of you who came out today, and for somebody who worked hard on making sure that we got this resolution at least drafted, I just want to say we really appreciate you coming out and showing support. I think it's reflective of this community and its inclusiveness. And I think that, this resolution, I'm hopeful we'll be able to pass it, but I think the hard work will start when we're able to be activists outside of this body in this room and make sure that existing residents and organizations within the community are equipped such that they can welcome refugees in our community. So thank you very much.
Thank you, and we'll talk more about that in a moment. First, we have the adoption of minutes from October 5th, October 12th, November 11th, and November 16th. Correct? Is that correct? Oh, sorry.
Yes, I'm sorry.
It's okay. And we can move them all at the same time, is that correct?
Yes.
So would anyone like to move adoption of the minutes?
So moved.
I got Councilmember Mayo, second.
Second.
Councilmember Qureshi. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? No. Minutes adopted unanimously. All right, let's move on to our first resolution, our first voting item, a resolution welcoming Syrian refugees. We had Councilmember Kovar suggested a couple of changes to this resolution. Yes.
Ms. Stewart, I have copies of the suggestions from Councilmember Kovar, so I thought I
Perfect.
could pass them out, so you'd have them in front of you.
Thank you.
Here you go.
And just so members of the public know, these were some slight changes to the two therefore clauses, resolve clauses at the end. The first resolve clause now reads with Councilmember Kovar's changes. Now therefore be it resolved that the City Council of Tacoma Park, Maryland hereby affirms its duty and willingness to welcome our Syrian neighbors who are approved as refugees, because to shut the door on those in need is inconsistent with basic values of our community. The second resolve clause now reads, and be it further resolved that the City of Tacoma Park will work with other levels of government non-governmental agencies, and residents of the city to identify ways in which the community can provide support for refugees' families relocating to the Tacoma Park area and integrating into our community. And I believe Councilmember Kovar had another change on the 6th whereas clause. Councilmember Kovar, did you want to take out where it says president?
Well, we can talk about that.
Okay.
Should I explain? I can explain these. The changes that the mayor just referred to are fairly minor. I think it's important, though, in this resolution to not have it only be something which expresses opposition to what the governor said and other people who've made similar statements have said, but also to make it clear that as a city we really want specifically, to the extent we can, to actually have, if there are approved refugees who can come here, to have that happen. And so I just thought where it said previously it was our duty to accept them, I thought it made sense to say, and our willingness to accept them. In other words, we're not just saying we ought to do it, we're saying we want to do it. And in the second part, the second resolve clause, it previously said that the city of Tacoma Park would work with other levels of government and non-governmental agencies, and I just suggested adding, and residents of the city, because I think an important part of this would be not just organizations or other levels of government, but people who live here realistically. If, and I don't know if it will happen, but if anybody ends up being resettled here, it will be in part due to individual residents being welcoming to them. So that was the notion behind that. The only other thing, and my colleagues may feel differently on this, and I don't feel strongly about it, but the current language refers to the president's policy. And to me, I think the point would be that this isn't just something that President Obama dreamed up. We have a long history of welcoming refugees. It's always been the case that they're subject to pretty rigorous vetting. And there have been exceptions along the way for people from Cuba and Haiti and other places like that. But generally, everybody is really checked out very rigorously, and it's not just President Obama kind of dreamed it up. I thought, therefore, that we might want to drop that reference, but I'm not going to say I feel incredibly strongly about it. See what other people think.
Mm-hmm. Did the city clerk or the deputy city manager have a comment? Your lights are on. Okay. No, it's okay. Any other comments before we move this? Yeah, go ahead.
I actually tend to agree with Councilmember Kovar. If the council looks at the 1, 2, 3, 4.
Sixth.
The 6th, but the 5th whereas clause already says President Obama has committed to accepting 10,000 Syrian refugees, and for I think the 6th whereas clause, it's perfectly reasonable to take out the words under the president's refugee program and just write it as those individuals wishing to immigrate to the United States must apply through the United Nations. And I think that still satisfies, I think, a legitimate concern as to the accuracy of what that really says there.
Thank you. Councilmember Smith?
Thank you. First of all, I'm going to support the resolution. I think it's important that the city weigh in on this issue. The one addition that I would like to see in the second whereas clause is after different languages, I would like to see and cultures. I think, for example, in Essex House, there are a number of people that come from all parts of the world, and a huge number of them are refugees. And they do speak English, but they do have different cultures. So I think if we're going to, I don't think listing different languages is enough. I would like to see adding the word cultures. And I support the amendments from my two colleagues. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Mao?
Thank you, Mayor. I regret that there's a very small number of situations in which I'm not allowed to vote or participate in the debate because I work at the White House, and there's only a limited space in federal law that allows someone like me to serve on a nonpartisan city government or local government. And so on issues that have such a political connection, I often have to ask permission, and so on this issue, I cannot participate. So while you vote, I'm going to leave the podium and then come
Okay.
back.
Thank you, member. Thank you, Councilmember Meredith. All right, any other comments before Councilmember Siemens?
Thank you, Mayor. You know, there's been some understandable negative reaction to the suggestion of accepting refugees from Syria in the United States. And I would just like to remind people that there were similar concerns with other refugees coming to this country, including, I think, Mr. Kovar mentioned the Cuban refugees several years ago. So I think it's important that we recognize those fears, and also remind people that that we have a process, especially since the Refugee Act of 1980, that has been very successful. It's been said that it is widely accepted as a success because of the vetting process that goes on. I believe, read in the Washington Post that over 3 million refugees have come to the United States through that process since the late 1970s, and only a handful of those have been a problem. Again, the process works. It works a lot better than some of the other processes we have that limit people from coming to this country, or don't limit people from coming to this country. So I think, you know, this is one that works. I don't know why we would worry about this one. You know, I would be more worried about people who are U.S. citizens that live in this country that are disinvested in community. I think we should be spending more effort in reaching out to them and be less worried about Syrian refugees.
Before we continue the conversation, I just wanted to see, can we do a check-in on these changes? And does anyone have any comments on the changes that have been proposed so far? Because otherwise, I'd like to see if we can move this resolution. Okay. All right. Anyone want to move the resolution?
So moved. So moved.
All right. I'm going to let Councilmember Qureshi, since he drafted it. Councilmember Qureshi moved. Councilmember Smith seconded. And now any other discussions? Councilmember Schultz.
Thank you. I guess I don't want to get real animated up here and take up a lot of time, but I do want people to know that I'm utterly and thoroughly outraged by Governor Hogan's words. Just because I'm not pounding my fist and shouting real loud doesn't reflect my true feelings. And I find that the irony of when we see these almost weekly now mindless shootings of innocent people, like we just had another one yesterday, I guess, in Denver or somewhere in Colorado. Those are concerned about terrorists immigrating to the United States. Seems that the problem is that it's the Americans that are causing us all this sadness and tragedy. I don't see that it's immigrants doing this. And as far as I know, not very many of these people who do this sort of thing are even Muslim. They're Christian. They just have, you know. So anyway, I could go on, and I will spare you. But I do want to say one thing is that, assuming we are going to pass this resolution, then it's going to be incumbent on the community here at large to organize around this issue. I've already exchanged some emails with Thomas Nephew about that idea of trying to find a way to make that happen. It's not the sort of thing that I have any competency or knowledge to be able to do, but clearly there are many people in the city who live here who do have these exposures to immigration resettlement programs, and I hope that we can get, once this is adopted, then, you know, get to gather people together who say, yes, I want to help.
Thank you. Councilmember Kovar.
Just one other brief thing. Mr. Nephew, who is also a Ward 1 resident, mentioned a document that he had forwarded to me, and I did attempt to send it to others, and for some reason it didn't go through because it's kind of lengthy, so I'll circulate it again later. But it was a report from the city of Baltimore, and they have what they call a New Americans Task Force, and as Thomas mentioned, a lot of the recommendations are things that would be much better for a much larger city that we wouldn't be able to do. But they had an interesting idea, which to me would have potentially broader applications than just to the refugee situation, because it's about how we engage with immigrants and the immigrant community generally within the city in areas like small business development, workforce development, housing, youth, safety, all of those things. And so we may take a look at it. Again, if I can get it to my colleagues, again, I'll make that attempt. And we might want to just look at it as something that we could take into account as a way of going forward, again, not just on the refugee question, but on the broader immigrant communities that we have here in the city. So I didn't want people to think that I had not included them in a useful document.
Thank you. I'll just take this opportunity to echo, I think, what Councilmember Schultz said, that unfortunately it seems that weekly we're reminded of the terrible consequences of extremism and the heightening of fears by incendiary rhetoric. And that tonight, this is our way to counter some of that's happening, and to remind the world that compassion and empathy are far better ways to build inclusive, strong, and healthy communities. And as we hear these debates, lots of times it's easy for people to forget that when they throw around words like immigrant, refugee, Muslim, terrorist, that we're talking about people. We're talking about mothers and fathers, sons and daughters, aunts and uncles. We're talking about human beings who have a right to human dignity and who have a right to be treated with fairness and with justice, and not with hatred or bigotry. And so I'm glad as a council tonight, this is one of the first things we actually get to vote on as a new council. And I was reminded this weekend about a quote from Martin Luther King Jr., who said, "Our lives begin to end the day we become silent about things that matter." And I think it's important that we raise our voices this evening for the refugees in Syria and to reaffirm our community's beliefs. And so with that, all those in favor of the resolution welcoming Syrian refugees, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? No? It passes, I guess, unanimously with one recusal. Thank you. All right. Now we'll move on to, okay. Now I guess welcome the head of Public Works to talk to us about the Colby Park Playground.
Sure.
And can you save the purple dinosaur?
We will certainly look into that. I think the location will have to change based on the layout of the playground, but it's certainly an issue we can raise, both with the design person as well as the contractor. As the mayor mentioned, these two items in front of you are really interrelated. The city's been working with the neighborhood for some time now on the renovation of Colby Park. It was originally part of the FY15 budget, but was not completed that year, and so it's rolled into the fiscal year 16 budget. We had hired a design firm that had been working both on the Colby and the Sligo Mill Overlook Playground. The Colby Playground design was finalized with neighborhood input. We had 3 different meetings in several homes on the street, so neighbors could participate in the discussions about the options available for the renovation. This playground, as with others, is done with Program Open Space. The intention is to use Program Open Space funds, which enables the city to take advantage of an allocation of money we get from the state. 3/4 of the project cost would be covered by Program Open Space and 1/4 by the city. The original intended budget was $150,000 for construction. We went out to bid and only got a single response. Because it was over budget, we put it out for bid again and got 2 responses. The first ordinance you have in front of you is for the purchase of the equipment itself. When we put the bid out, we developed several different options for pricing. One was to do the full project, equipment purchase, installation. The other removed the equipment cost from that. Because we are tax exempt, oftentimes in past projects we've purchased the equipment ourselves and avoided the markup cost and the tax cost that the contractor would have to pay for that same equipment. We also had a third option which removed the landscaping component. So in looking at the bid responses, and you see in the second item that we'll discuss tonight, the various pricing proposals, it's pretty apparent that it's advantageous for the city to purchase the equipment ourselves directly. There's a U.S. Communities program that exists, a procurement process for municipalities across the country that we can purchase this equipment through. It's a 20% discount of their market price. So the first item is the purchase of that selected equipment for direct purchase from the city. Most of the equipment that's identified for the park is produced by one manufacturer, with the exception of a shade structure, which is under the $5,000 budget. So most of the equipment will be purchased through Compan. There are some existing pieces of equipment that are intended to be reused. And again, as I mentioned, we'll take a look at the Purple Dinosaur and see. I don't think there's any safety issues with that, but there could be. Sometimes what we find is some of the equipment doesn't have the right types of handles and whatnot, particularly if it's got some age to it. So we'll take a look at that as well. So the first item is just a purchase of the equipment for the renovation directly through the city. Should I move into the second, or do you want to deal with this one by itself?
We can deal with both at the same time.
Okay. And the second is just the installation of the playground equipment. These days, with any playground renovation, you have to address a great number of issues in addition to just the playground structure itself. So in this particular park, it's got a history of kind of wet soils, so we're going to be addressing the drainage of the soils as well as the stormwater management requirements that are now required even for playground structures. You wouldn't necessarily consider them impervious, but we do have to plan for stormwater maintenance from the playground structure itself. As I mentioned, we had two responses for the bid. The company that it's the lowest bidder, Sandoval Landscaping, is not a company that we've worked with before. Triple J Construction is a company that we've worked with before. However, in checking the references for Sandoval, they came up very positive. We called three different companies or organizations that had worked with Sandoval and had positive responses from them. It was also a contractor that our design person has worked with before, so she was comfortable with their ability to perform the project. But again, that is secondhand information. It's not any direct information we have. Once the council moves this item, we have a second reading, so it'll come up again for a second discussion. We then develop a contract that'll have the various requirements and warranties and other items associated with the performance of the contract. For this type of project, because it's not relatively that much money, we don't do a performance bond or other types of hold-offs of money for the completion of the work. Though we will have a process where they invoice, and we have to accept that invoice throughout the process of the construction. So if there's issues with the quality of the work, we would take that up at the time of the invoice. I'm not sure of the details of the question that the member of the community had, but I'd be happy to speak to that in any greater detail in the future. So those are the two items we have in front of you. One is for the equipment purchase and the other is for the award of the contract for the installation. The assumption is that the work would get going in January or February, depending again on weather. If we have some extreme cold, that would restrict the ability for them to start. But barring any heavy freeze or tremendous amount of snow, they are intending to start in the winter.
Any questions? Councilmember Mail?
Thank you, Ms. Braithwaite, for your work on this and for the designs that are available on the city website on the project. What do you guys call that? The project webpage? Project directory. Thank you, on the project directory. I was able to piece my way through it, but one of the things I'd encourage you to have done in future drawings of things like this playground is more of a simple, visual of what it will look like when it's done. I did not find anything that showed the actual equipment that we were purchasing, or just sort of a general view of what this would look like. So, for example, with the library renovations, we have what would the front of the building look like, and I just didn't find those in I think it's a 40-page document of drawings that show the bioretention and the playground equipment and the shade structures. So very comprehensive, but just sort of lacking the one visual. If somebody's just gonna look at one page, what that would be. I'm fully supportive of this project, as probably some of my colleagues know. The Colby Avenue, Cherry Avenue neighborhood is a special part of Tacoma Park. We all have special, distinct neighborhoods in different parts of the city. In my time on council, this is a neighborhood that has dealt with some drug problems associated with a dead end on one end of the street that has relatively few houses on it, where cars would park frequently, and really appreciate the city's responsiveness on that. This is the street where last year we had a murder of a resident. And it's generally a street that feels like it's been neglected, or not maybe neglected, but just is out of the way of the city, is unnoticed. And so I know that they're deeply appreciative of the work that the city has put into the planning associated with this project and the community meetings that Ms. Braithwaite referred to, and how important this place, this public gathering space is for the neighborhood within the block or two-block area. So really hope the project gets full support and that we can move forward with construction early in the new year. One question I would ask, and this is just really a comment for long-term consideration, one can get access to this street in a couple of different ways, but the park itself, I don't believe, is accessible from the backside from Larch or from Lincoln Avenue. And if at any point in the future there was a chance of acquiring one of those, 5-foot wide easements on properties, on the residential properties behind it, that could potentially create more access for more people to visit this park, but also to connect the neighborhood with adjoining streets. So I just encourage the city to look out for that with the 2 or 3 properties that abut the city property from the rear, if there's ever a chance to do that. And I've walked similar access lanes essentially in Silver Spring and in DC and Hyattsville, where typically it's probably something that's been done decades ago, but it creates a route, an access route for people to get between 2 areas or to get to a public facility like this. So thank you.
Any other questions?
Yes.
Oh, yeah, sorry. Councilmember Schultz. You got it.
Keep your
I know.
match up numbers with people. I'm just curious about the pricing on this. If the Sandoval landscaping minus the equipment is the number $120,500, and then there's $54,688 for the cost of equipment purchase. So if I add those up, that comes out to a little over $175,000. Is that right?
That's correct.
And then Project Open Space is going to cover 3/4 of that 175. Is that?
Yeah, that's our intention. We're in kind of a unique situation with program open space, as opposed to in the past where we got program open space allocations every year.
Yeah.
We have now been told that we have an allocation of money of $330,000, and there's no more to be seen in the foreseeable future. So our allocation of program open space funds will be used. The original intention was for the dog park, Colby Playground, and Sligo Mill Overlook Park. We were able to get a Community Parks and Playground grant for the Sligo Mill Overlook Park, so we have a $250,000 grant that a Public Works staff member was able to get access to. So that removes that most likely from the need for program open space funding. But the dog park and this playground are the 2 items that remain, as well as I think the Lee Jordan Field. There were some payments relative to the Lee Jordan Field that was done through program open space. So unless something changes in the future, program open space may no longer be a viable avenue for us to use for our playground renovations.
Is this something that's happened under the current governor or a previous governor?
It started in the previous
The
administration.
previous administration. Is it part of the, do you understand the bigger picture as to why that happened?
Just issues of the recession and counties needing to hold on to funds. And Montgomery, we get our program open space money through the county, so the county gets first dibs on those dollars and then allocates accordingly. And they have a growing need, as well as we do, for those monies for recreational purposes.
So if I multiply 175,000 times 0.75, that's about 131,000 that would come out of that line item, and therefore that would, leaving the balance would be available, I guess, then for the dog park.
And that'll, of course, be a council decision, as each of these are. If there's other priorities or things that come up, then the council makes those determinations. But currently, those are the items in the queue, and we are not aware of any additional funding coming our way through Program Open Space in the foreseeable future.
Thank you very much.
Councilmember Mel?
Councilmember Schultz reminded me of one more thing I wanted to mention, which is, although the money comes to us through the state, a large share of that funding that appears to be state funding is actually federal funding. It comes from something called the Land and Water Conservation Fund, which has provided $15 billion since 1965 in money to support local recreational programs, protection of open space. Congress has, of course, not, after 50 years, has proposed not funding that program anymore. And so currently that program at the federal level is also not receiving new appropriations. It used to be funded from oil and gas royalties.
Great. All right. So let's look at the first of these ordinances. It's a two-reading ordinance authorizing purchase of playground equipment for Colby Park. Does anyone want to move this?
So moved.
Councilmember Mail moved. Councilmember Schultz seconded. Any other discussion on the first item? No? All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The first ordinance is unanimous. All right, the second reading, the second one is two-reading ordinance authorizing award of a contract for the renovation of the Colby Park Playground. Anyone would like to move, please?
Move it.
Councilmember Siemens moves. Second?
Second.
Councilmember Qureshi, seconded. Any discussion on this one? Okay. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, that one also passed unanimously. All right, third item, I think we're just going to plow along and not take a break, is our council rules of procedure. So last week, as a new city council, we met to review how we would like to all work together, and we thought this was a good time as a new city council to review council rules of procedure, which actually, I think I'm looking at the city clerk, had not been updated for a bit. Is that correct?
It's been a few years.
It's been a few years. So we've decided to take a look at this and update it. Two of the things that, beginning in January of 2016, we will change as a new city council. One is that we are moving our meetings from Monday night to be on Wednesday evenings, and that will start on January 13th. Also, we will be starting our meetings at 7:30 instead of varying the times from 7 and 7:30. So they will be at 7:30 unless for some other reason we decide to change them, but the regular meeting times will be at 7:30. There were other practices that have been in place for the last few years that did not make it into the council rules of procedure and are now in the new document. One is that on the nights when there are voting items on the agenda, public comments on voting items are called first, followed by general comments, just like the practice we followed this evening. The second item that we had been following as a general practice was that for all but the very routine items, work sessions are often scheduled at a meeting at least 1 week before an ordinance or resolution is to be voted on. This enables the public to hear a discussion and learn about an issue before commenting on a voting item. So these two things were things that we have been doing as a city council, but were not put into the rules of procedure and are now in the red line document we will discuss this evening. In addition, just some other things, to the extra meetings that we generally schedule in April to discuss the budget, the council will continue the practice of holding additional meetings in January to discuss city priorities and benchmarks to prepare for the budget. Other things that, just to let everyone know, that we discussed last week was making sure that we have flexibility in the agenda, so that if it happens, if we have a work session item that is later in the agenda, for example, but there are many people here from the public who would like to discuss that issue, we will move it up earlier in the agenda. Many of us on the council feel it is important to explore holding council meetings in various locations in the community, and we will continue to do that. We need to meet two criteria. One, it needs to be a space that is open to the public and is ADA accessible. The third item that we're looking into is the possibility of recording presentations beforehand, or maybe interviews with council members that would be played prior to city council meetings to enable us to shorten the length of our meetings. And finally, just as another announcement, we will be starting in January throughout the city holding Friday morning coffees with myself and the city manager and council members to be in different parts of the cities on different Friday mornings to have coffee with residents and hear about their concerns and any issues that are coming up specifically in their part of the community. And there'll be more about that in the next, in the January edition of the newsletter, and we'll make sure to get that information out. We just wanted to update people on the conversations we've been having as a new council. So regarding the council rules on procedure, tonight we'll have a discussion of it, and next week we will have a resolution adopting the council rules. So, council members, any other comments or thoughts on this? Councilmember Qureshi?
I just have a very quick question. I fully support these changes, and I think it's a great idea. Now, during the campaign, it became very clear to me that residents were interested of the idea of traveling council meetings from time to time in different parts of the city. And maybe somebody can give me some guidance on this, but aside from the ADA accessibility, which is important, and a welcoming public space, I mean, our folks here with City TV and the work that they do, what sort of, as I try to scout potential locations in Ward 3, does there need to be some kind of a baseline system in place so that technology and City TV can also be there and do what they need to do?
I would have to look into that. I know we recently acquired some equipment that enables City TV to actually do live recordings and broadcast live, so it may be less of an issue now than it was even a year ago. But I'll have to look into it and confirm that.
Thank you.
Councilmember Mel?
Thank you, Mayor Stewart. Fully support these changes and the ones made by the previous council by Mayor Williams. It's a pleasure to work on a body that has been flexible and willing to experiment, to try different things, and I look forward to these changes and potentially more. I am supportive of trying out different locations, although some parts of the city are harder to do that in than others. Even if it's just a different space, that may be something that, even if it's not particularly far away from this building, just being in a different place. I'm thinking of, for example, Historic Tacoma. It may have value and attract people who wouldn't otherwise come. And especially something like Historic Tacoma or any place else where it's visible sort of through a big window, that changes the feel of the meeting too. Instead of behind open but closed doors. I hope that our TV programming doesn't become a barrier. It would be ironic because my phone takes really good video. And if we had to go someplace where we couldn't get a video camera in for some reason, we could record ourselves and, archive the tape that way, just to try it. From a procedural perspective, I am by no means an expert on Robert's rules. But I just remind everybody that we can always use Robert's rules to be flexible. So if we don't want to talk about an agenda item, we can delay it to time certain if there's enough of us that want to do that. or anything else. The Roberts Rule is really long, so there's probably lots of room in there to use it, to be flexible, and I would just urge us to do that. And associated with that, the other comment I wanted to make is that I often feel like I'm in a bit of a catch-22, and it's complicated, but I'll try to be simple in saying that being on council is a part-time job. It's not supposed to take us, 40 hours a week, mastery with staff, and which often means that when we hear about an issue, we may have read about it a couple days in advance or a week in advance, but we're not experts on it. And so then you get to the work session, or if it's a simpler issue, it might be a complex issue, but what we're voting on is relatively simple. It might be first reading, but you actually have some complicated questions, or you may have amendments you want to make. And I sometimes find myself feeling like, well, I don't think I'm quite ready to make an amendment at first reading. And then when you get a second reading, people say, well, we can't make an amendment now because the public wouldn't know that we're making a change. And I just say as a principle, I'm going to try to, but I mentioned this for my colleagues' benefit and the public's benefit. I'm going to try to propose amendments at first reading or at work session, even if I don't have the idea fully captured in my mind of how to do it and whether it's, exactly the right thing to do. It might just be a relatively good idea just to try to make things like that happen. I'm also not going to shy away from making amendments at the second reading because that's why we have a second reading. And if it means that some members of the public didn't know that something was going to happen, well, then we're creating an incentive for them to show up. Because it's not just a pro forma meeting where we're all going to vote for something it's not going to change, but it's a dynamic council, it's a democracy where we're learning and we're adapting as we go. So I would just encourage folks, and I'm going to try to pursue this myself, to be flexible about making amendments, about changing content, ideally at first reading or at work session, but potentially even including amendments at the final point of working on something. And I'd also encourage us to allow us to pass things and make changes, but not to be shy about going back to something and trying to make other adjustments, potentially soon after we pass it. Again, because we can do that, and we don't have to debate things forever. We can be flexible. Thank you.
Great. Councilmember Siemens.
Thank you, Mayor. I just wanted to remind council that in the past we have had council meetings outside of the community center. In fact, we've had walking council meetings for a number of years, and they were somewhat successful, not real successful. We, again, the turnout was not as much as I think the council had hoped for. But I think what is helpful is if there are issues that are geographically interesting. In other words, it's something that topic that's a particular hot item for a specific area in the city, that those would be good opportunities for conducting a council meeting outside of the council chambers here.
Councilmember Schultz.
I'm supportive of all these changes that that you, the mayor, have proposed. I welcome just the idea that we can do things differently. But on the other hand, some of these I would like to think of them as experimental, and we'll see how they work. I mean, to me, the idea of having Friday morning coffees somewhere, scattered around the city with the mayor and whoever else on the city council shows up sounds like a really good idea. But then, naturally, I'd think, gosh, I'm a city council member. I'm the last guy to be able to judge whether other people would think it's a great idea just because I think so. So we'll see how that goes. But I think it could be fun and give people a chance to connect to us and to the process that we're working through in trying to get things done in this city. The other thing I wanted to mention was that in regard to the text of the procedures, I suggested some changes, and I don't know how you want to proceed with those. I mean, this is not a voting item tonight, but it's something that I think I'd like us all to consider. I can read them out loud if that would be useful to the rest of us here or to the public who is listening in. Do you want me to do that?
Sure,
or?
yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Without getting too bogged down in details, where we're talking about the 3-minute rule, I would delete the text "in general" at the beginning of that sentence. That, where are we here?
Paragraph 6.
Paragraph 6.
Line 7.
Yeah, we should just say speakers should limit their comments to 3 minutes and to be explicit about that, and not deal with texts where we say "in general," because if we're going to have a rule, we need to be prepared to use it. But I would add that we can think about additional text that would say, if you, in other words, a prospective person who would be talking, think that your public comments need to extend more than 3 minutes, please contact the mayor or the city council for permission to add additional 1 or 2 minutes. Presentations, and then presentations by members of the public that would last more than 5 minutes are welcome, but must be scheduled with the mayor or city clerk so that they can be added to the agenda. I would add this. I am recommending this kind of language because I think these changes will make it more comfortable for potential speakers to feel like they will have the opportunity to speak and say what they want to say, and not feel hurried or frustrated. And I think these changes will also make it easier for the mayor to enforce the 3-minute rule rather than sort of always allowing people to go on and on. The other suggestion that I would add was on paragraph 12, where we would drop the last sentence in that paragraph that says, if residents wish to be recognized during the work sessions, it is best if they let their council member know of their interest before the meeting. And I would like it to think that text could be a little clearer by saying members of the public are not permitted to speak during work sessions, which has always been the case, unless invited to do so during the work session by the mayor or by prior arrangement with their council members. And I would also add the sentence, the public are always welcome to speak on work session items during the public comments period. So there isn't any confusion or thought that we're trying to shut out anybody from being able to to allow them to participate and add information to our work session discussion. These are just minor things with regard to our procedures, but I think it would help clarify our intent and our procedure.
Okay. Thank you. Councilmember Kovar?
Yes, just as a new person trying to get a better handle on how far in advance we see all the documents and so on. So would you mind clarifying if the meetings are scheduled for Wednesdays as a general matter? When would the agenda or the more detailed parts of it be available?
Will the city clerk address that?
Right. The plan is we would post on the Tuesday before. So it would be 8 days before. Right now we're doing 10 days with 2 weekends. So we would have for staff 2 Fridays before to turn in their items, and then the city manager could review, and we would then post on the Tuesday. So it would be the Tuesday a week before the meeting.
So is that more or less time than now? Or
Well,
I know things get added later sometimes too, right?
Right. And since you've been on the council, we've been later than we had been earlier. So typically what we've been doing is posting Friday, 2 Fridays before a meeting. But with the Wednesday meeting, we're suggesting the posting Wednesday the week before, and that would be, we're suggesting that to allow time to prepare things, because with the Wednesday, staff needs time to prepare between meetings, and it's difficult to go too far in advance because we lap ourselves with preparing second reading before first reading is even finished. And we do that a little bit now, but we didn't want to make it worse. But of course, we're flexible as to what the council desires.
Yeah, I think maybe that's something we can try in January. But as as Councilmember Schultz this afternoon asked for the noise ordinance, I think when there's an issue that, in particular, one of the council members needs feedback from residents, if it's available, we don't have to hold it until that Tuesday. That's right. We can make it available. Councilmember Mail?
Thank you. So just speaking to that point, at least for the first 3.5 years I was on council, we got agenda items Friday or Saturday before the meeting, so 24 or 48, 72 hours. So a week or 8 days is fantastic. I'm all for it. The one comment I was going to make on Councilmember Schultz's edits was just the phrase "are welcomed." So 5-minute or longer comments are welcomed, and I might just suggest changes to those words "are welcomed" to make it may be allowed or something, just to not go overboard in that particular experiment.
I agree with that.
So I will provide some edits for the first reading.
Yeah.
Terrific. Any other council comments? All right, and we will have the resolution on this council rules of procedure next week. So if there are other edits, if people hadn't had a chance to look at it, please email them and we'll review them next week. And I think with that, those are all our items for this evening. Yes, go ahead.
Where do the rules live? Like, where are they on the
Where do
website?
they live? Right now, they're not living anywhere.
No.
They will live on the council page and on the council meeting page.
That was one of the reasons we decided to update them, because I did not know they existed either.
This is all news to me.
We did not know until our city clerk, when we started talking about changes. And so they had, and as I mentioned before, they had not been updated for a while. So we thought this was a good opportunity to update them and get them on our brand-new website.
So since this is on the agenda for December 7th, is that's right, if any email suggestions, if they came soon, tomorrow even, we could get the new version posted on the website, or as soon as we have your comments.
Great. Terrific. All right. We are adjourned.